You let them build what on your land? My buddy Tony shrieked, mouth half full of a microwave burrito. I didn't even look up from my lemonade as I pointed toward the rows of pastel-colored houses rising in perfect, soulless symmetry on what used to be my uncle's wilderness hideout. 96 homes, I said calmly, complete with HOA overlords, freshly laid driveways, and backyard barbecue bans. Tony choked on his burrito. You sold it to an HOA? The same people who fine you if your grass grows too tall. He was right to panic. See, no one in their right mind hands over 50 acres of land to a homeowners association. No one except me. And not because I'm stupid, oh no. I let them build their little Stepford suburb on my dirt. Let them hold smug ribbon-cutting ceremonies. Let them strut around like emperors of a cardboard kingdom. Because I was waiting for the right moment to drop a bombshell so big it would make every last one of them wish they'd built their dream neighborhood somewhere else. Somewhere far, far away from the land I never really let go of. It all started 6 months earlier when my Uncle Hank kicked the bucket and left me his pride and joy. A massive chunk of unspoiled, tree-thick, roadless land just outside of town. No electricity, no plumbing, just a whole lot of squirrels and one extremely territorial badger. Everyone else in the family passed on it like it was a cursed monkey paw, but I didn't. I was broke, jobless, and fresh out of a failed tech startup, so land, even wild land infested with badgers, sounded like a win. The plan was simple: sell it to a logging company, or maybe one of those weird doomsday preppers who think the apocalypse is coming on a Tuesday. That's when they showed up. 3 of them, dressed like they had just walked off the cover of a lifestyle magazine for aggressively boring people. One had a clipboard, one had a drone, and the third had Karen energy so strong it made the grass recoil under her heels. They introduced themselves as the executive committee of the Silver Pines Homeowners Association. I was confused. HOA? Here, there wasn't a single paved road within 2 miles. But they had plans. Oh, they had plans. 96 houses, solar-powered, smart tech-equipped, complete with a community dog park, pickleball court, and a biometric gate that could scan residents' faces to let them in. All they needed was my land. I should have said no. I really should have. But they offered a stupid amount of money, and more importantly, they were smug about it. Something in the way Karen, her real name was Linda, but let's be honest, she was a Karen, smacked her lips as she called it an investment in civilization, ticked me off. So I didn't say no. I said yes, with one small, sneaky clause buried in the paperwork. A clause so innocuous, they never even noticed. And that was their first mistake. Now, here's the part where Tony, my conspiracy-loving best friend, comes back into the story like a caffeinated raccoon with a whiteboard. He was convinced something was fishy. No one builds a utopia in the middle of nowhere unless they are hiding something, he told me over pancakes the next day. What if it's a cover-up? What if your uncle was guarding a government secret? What if they are not an HOA but a front for underground lizard people? I nodded like a supportive friend, but all I could think about was how much money they were wiring into my account. I didn't believe in lizard people, but I did believe in long games. As construction kicked off, the HOA moved in like ants on a sugar cube. Bulldozers flattened forests, foundations were poured, and cookie-cutter homes rose faster than you could say violation letter. I got weekly updates by choice. I was technically still part of the neighborhood email chain, which they never bothered to remove me from. Mistake number 2. That's how I learned about the solar panel disputes, the great mailbox color debate, and the time one guy was fined $200 for having wind chimes that violated this sound aesthetic. They were too busy micromanaging their freshly minted suburb to notice me watching from the sidelines. To everyone else, it looked like I'd made the dumbest deal of the decade. Even my mom called to say, "Honey, I know you're not always the brightest, but this is a new low." That one stung. But I just smiled and nodded and kept playing the part of the clueless country bumpkin who got lucky and cashed out. Meanwhile, the HOA threw lavish housewarming parties, complete with drone shows and quinoa fountains. They gave themselves titles like Community Vibe Coordinator and Head of Visual Uniformity. Karen, became the self-appointed queen, handing out fines like Oprah gives out cars. You get a citation. You get a citation. They never asked why I still kept the small shack on the far end of the property, tucked just past the old tree line, or why I insisted it stay untouched, or why I came back every Sunday pretending to fish in the empty creek bed nearby. That shack wasn't just a memory of my uncle. It was the entrance to something they hadn't found yet, something they wouldn't find until I wanted them to. By month 5, the place was fully operational. 96 homes, 96 happy families. Or well, sort of happy families who couldn't hang wind chimes or own red cars or plant daisies that weren't HOA approved. But the Silver Pines HOA called it perfection. They threw a massive grand opening event, complete with ribbon cutting, champagne, and a brass band that played Coldplay covers. I stood in the back, sipping my lemonade, smiling as Linda gave a speech about progress, unity, and the triumph of order over chaos. That was the moment. I leaned over to Tony and whispered, "You ready?" "For what?" he asked, confused. "For the bombshell," I said. He blinked. "Wait, there's a bombshell." Oh, my sweet, suspicious friend, there was always a bombshell. They just never saw it coming. For a little while, it actually worked. Silver Pines became the shiny, over-controlled utopia the HOA had dreamed about. The grass was always trimmed to exactly 2 inches, the driveways sparkled like showroom floors, and every mailbox looked like it was cloned from the same factory. Kids rode their bikes in perfect little circles. Parents waved politely with forced smiles, and Linda strutted around like a monarch patrolling her freshly conquered kingdom. The HOA newsletter went from monthly to weekly to daily, now including updates on everything from approved flower bed color palettes to acceptable curtain transparency levels. Yes, curtain transparency. You couldn't make this stuff up. They had gone full HOA dictator mode, and they were loving it. The first few residents seemed happy, or at least they acted like it, but that didn't last long. At first, it was minor complaints. A man named Glenn got a warning because his trash bin lid wasn't fully closed. A young couple received a $75 fine for using a portable basketball hoop that was, according to Linda, aesthetic pollution. Someone's dog barked 3 times in one day, and suddenly there was a new regulation limiting outdoor pet noise to 5 seconds per hour. People began muttering during block parties, which, of course, had mandatory attendance. Silver Pines was beautiful on the outside and suffocating on the inside. Still, Linda and her little council kept pushing. They installed surveillance cameras at the entrance and exits. Not security cameras, oh no. These were facial recognition devices for community safety. Tony, naturally, was convinced we were about 5 days away from a full Black Mirror episode. He started wearing a fake mustache every time we drove through the neighborhood. Not that we needed to go often. I had already set up everything I needed in the shack on the edge of the property. A few solar panels, a generator, and enough camping gear to survive a quiet apocalypse. But mostly, I was there to observe, to watch the cracks form, to see just how far they'd push before someone snapped. Linda didn't even notice me anymore. To her, I was the guy who'd sold them the land and then disappeared like a ghost. She never once questioned why I still had access or why my name was still tied to certain utility accounts. She was too busy organizing HOA Yoga Wednesdays and writing strongly worded emails about seasonal wreaths. She had become the queen of petty authority, and the more control she had, the more ridiculous the rules became. Someone painted their front door a color called Rebel Blue. It was outlawed the next day. A resident hosted a backyard birthday party with music that could be heard from 3 houses away. Suddenly, all parties needed pre-approval and decibel monitoring. Silver Pines wasn't a neighborhood. It was a live-action dystopia disguised as a planned community. The HOA headquarters, yes, they had one, was a converted model home turned command center. Linda held weekly meetings there, complete with refreshments, PowerPoint presentations, and something called a vibe score that rated each homeowner's compliance. There was even a chart, a real, actual printed chart. Tony saw it once and nearly passed out from laughing. The worst part? The people didn't leave. They grumbled, sure, but they were too deep in mortgage contracts and too proud to admit they'd made a mistake. The HOA knew it, and they used that fear like a weapon. I sat back and watched. Every week that passed, the tension grew. It was like watching a pot boil, slow at first, then inevitable. Then one afternoon, things got weird. A group of kids playing near one of the retention ponds heard a noise underground, like a low hum, barely audible, but rhythmic. Curious little explorers that they were, they followed the sound to the edge of the neighborhood, right near the tree line. And that's when one of them fell through the ground. It wasn't a deep fall, maybe 6 feet down, but what they landed on was metal, solid steel. By the time the HOA arrived, Karen in full meltdown mode, the kid had already told everyone what he saw. A thick, rusted door with yellow warning stripes and a big red wheel in the center. Nobody knew what it was. Some said it was an old septic system. Others thought it might be part of a forgotten utility structure. But I knew better. I knew exactly what they had found. Suddenly, the HOA wasn't so smug. They called in a construction crew to seal off the area, but the rumors had already started flying. A few curious residents pulled up historical maps of the area and discovered something strange. There had once been a federal designation for a restricted research zone on the land back in the 1960s. No details, just that it had been redacted in later records. Naturally, Tony's brain went into overdrive. Government experiments, Cold War secrets, possibly aliens. The HOA tried to quiet it down. They blocked access to the area with fencing, claimed it was unstable terrain, and issued memos forbidding residents from speculative discussions on community message boards. But it was too late. The Whisper network had already formed. That night, I got an anonymous text from a burner phone, Tony's obviously, that read, "They found the hatch. This is it. Time to move." I didn't reply. Not yet. They weren't ready. The tension was there. The cracks had formed, but the explosion needed just a little more heat. Then came the blueprints. A nosy resident filed a Freedom of Information Act request and, to everyone's surprise, actually got something back. Blacked out, heavily censored, but clear enough to confirm what I'd known all along. Underneath Silver Pines lay a decommissioned government facility. A bunker. Not just any bunker, one of the largest in the state, built for Project Exodus, a now defunct initiative from the height of the Cold War. No one knew what Project Exodus was, but the name alone was enough to trigger panic. Residents freaked out. The idea that their dream homes sat atop some unknown military installation wasn't exactly comforting. Some called realtors, others called lawyers. Linda called a PR firm. But none of it could undo what was coming next. Because while everyone was scrambling for answers, the one thing they didn't know, couldn't possibly know, was what I had slipped into that little clause in the sale agreement. According to paragraph 11, subsection C, page 14, any previously undisclosed subterranean structure discovered on the property shall revert full ownership rights of the land, and all modifications made to it, to the original landholder. In other words, if they found anything underground, the entire neighborhood, every street, every house, every lawn sign, was legally mine again. And they had just uncovered the biggest underground surprise of them all. The neighborhood that once buzzed with lawnmowers and passive-aggressive neighborly waves was now eerily quiet. Silver Pines had transformed from a picture-perfect HOA fantasy into a community teetering on the edge of a full-blown anxiety meltdown. Since the discovery of the metal hatch, families had begun whispering in hushed tones at community events. Children were banned from going near the retention pond, and Linda walked around with a strange smile that barely masked the panic in her eyes. The HOA scrambled to retain control, issuing daily updates that somehow managed to say absolutely nothing. But everyone knew something big was under their feet, and no amount of HOA regulation could bury it. The hum returned a few nights later, not loud, but constant, an unnerving mechanical thrum that seemed to pulse through the ground. Residents reported hearing it most clearly at night when everything else was still. Some said it made their floorboards vibrate. One woman claimed her smart fridge kept resetting itself at 3:17 a.m. every morning. Rumors erupted faster than Linda could send cease and desist letters. A retired engineer down the block insisted the vibration patterns resembled early missile silo resonance. Another swore he heard voices echoing up from the earth. Tony, of course, had a different theory. He said the government never shut the bunker down. He was convinced there were people still down there, or worse, things. Linda finally addressed the elephant in the room during a hastily arranged town hall meeting held in the community's pickleball pavilion. Her speech was full of legal jargon and empty reassurances. The vibration was likely caused by shifting soil, she said, and the hatch had been sealed and was of no concern to homeowners. As if on cue, halfway through her speech, the lights flickered and the ground gave a soft groan. You could hear a pin drop. Then someone from the back muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Still think it's just raccoons, Linda?" The room erupted in murmurs and side glances. The confidence in her voice cracked just a little. Within days, things began spiraling. One family packed up and left in the dead of night, leaving behind a half-finished fence and a very confused golden retriever. A local YouTuber uploaded drone footage of the area, claiming electromagnetic interference near the hatch was scrambling his signal. The video went viral. News crews showed up, circling like vultures. HOA members tried to keep them out, but they only had jurisdiction within the gates. Outside the gates, it was open season. That's when a local journalist dug up the old land sale documents and found the clause. The one I'd written, the one that changed everything. I got the call from my lawyer while I was sipping coffee on the shack porch, watching two squirrels fight over a pine cone. He sounded half panicked, half impressed. Apparently, the HOA had just realized the implications of that clause and was now scrambling to disprove its validity. Too bad for them. It had been written, notarized, and slipped through the cracks of their own lazily reviewed paperwork. I had legal claim not just to the bunker, but to every square inch of land above it, including the 96 homes, the streets, the mailboxes, and the office Linda called Mission Control. The moment the story broke, everything changed. HOA members went from smug suburban overlords to desperate bureaucrats drowning in a sea of legalese. Linda tried to host an emergency board meeting to strategize, but only 3 members showed up. The rest were too busy calling lawyers, realtors, and extended family. Some residents were furious, others were relieved. More than a few secretly rooted for me. I started getting anonymous thank you notes slipped under the door of the shack. One had a drawing of Linda with devil horns and the caption, HOA'd. Another simply said, save us. Of course, Linda wasn't going down without a fight. She called a press conference, complete with a podium and backdrop featuring the Silver Pines logo. She stood in front of a crowd of confused residents and journalists and declared the clause invalid, claiming I had inserted it deceptively and violated the spirit of the agreement. She had even hired a lawyer who looked like he was cast from a legal drama, all slick hair and fake tan. They talked a big game, fraud, injunctions, bad faith contracts. But I had done my homework. The clause was watertight, fully disclosed, and initialed by her on page 14 in the original paperwork. I had a notarized copy framed in my bathroom. When the court date was set, I could practically hear the HOA unraveling at the seams. Residents began demanding answers. If I was right, their mortgages might be tied to homes they technically didn't own anymore. Banks got involved. Insurance companies refused to touch the place. By the time we walked into court, Silver Pines looked less like a neighborhood and more like a high-end ghost town. Tony, wearing a tie for the first time in a decade, came with me and whispered, "We're going to make history today, buddy, or get sued into the dirt. Either way, legendary." The court proceedings were surprisingly short. The judge read through the documents, asked a few pointed questions, then leaned back in her chair and said, "This clause is valid. The land, and by extension the properties built upon it, have reverted to Mr. Dave Walters as per the contractual agreement." Linda stood there, jaw twitching, face pale. Her lawyer blinked like he'd just been slapped by a stack of law books. And me? I smiled. By the time we stepped outside, news crews were already circling, microphones shoved in my face. "Mr. Walters, is it true you now own an entire neighborhood? Do you plan to evict the residents? What are your next steps?" I just said one thing before walking away. They built their empire on my land. Now it's my turn to build something bigger. That night, Silver Pines was more silent than ever. Half the residents had already put up for sale signs, which was adorable considering they didn't technically own their homes anymore. The other half just stayed inside, blinds drawn, pretending this wasn't happening. And Linda? She locked herself inside HOA headquarters. Tony claimed he saw her through a window, clutching a binder and pacing like a general retreating from battle. The once pristine lawns began to brown. Mail piled up. The surveillance cameras turned off, one by one. But I wasn't finished. I hadn't come this far just to reclaim a ghost town. The real surprise hadn't even begun yet, because beneath the homes, beneath the lawsuits and contracts and cracked suburban smiles, lay something even deeper than a Cold War bunker. Something that would turn Silver Pines into the most infamous neighborhood in the country. And soon, very soon, the world would see it. All of it. The news spread like wildfire. By the time the weekend hit, Silver Pines wasn't just a legal mess. It was a full-blown national spectacle. Every major news outlet had picked up the story. Man reclaims entire neighborhood with one hidden clause. HOA overthrown by former landowner. And Tony's personal favorite, from lawn fines to landmines. The HOA nightmare. The headlines kept rolling in, each more dramatic than the last. and each one dragging the Silver Pines Homeowners Association deeper into a hole they couldn't climb out of. Linda tried to spin it, of course. She gave interviews claiming the clause was a trick, that I had taken advantage of a good faith agreement, that I was some evil mastermind playing games with innocent families. But no one was buying it anymore. The court decision had been clear. I owned the land again, and since the HOA had built all 96 homes on my land without retaining any subterranean rights, they had basically gifted me an entire subdivision. The irony? Delicious. The backlash? Immediate. Homeowners were furious, not just at the situation, but at Linda and her board for failing to catch something so massive. Some accused them of negligence. Others said it was straight-up fraud. HOA members started resigning one by one. The ones who remained were too shell-shocked to function. They had gone from rulers of a meticulously controlled suburban kingdom to powerless tenants overnight. And I hadn't even lifted a finger. Not yet. That Monday, I held a press conference of my own. Tony set it up in front of the original shack, now looking far more official thanks to a hastily added podium and a borrowed American flag. The media showed up in droves, cameras pointed at me, boom mics hovering, reporters jostling for position. I stepped up, cleared my throat, and gave them what they wanted. I confirmed my legal ownership of the land and the homes. I assured the residents I wasn't here to ruin their lives. And then I dropped the real bombshell. I was turning Silver Pines into a theme park. Not a regular theme park. Oh no. I had partnered with a rapidly growing company that specialized in immersive experiences. They were building what they called Bunker World, a sci-fi themed, post-apocalyptic attraction based entirely on the newly rediscovered Cold War facility beneath the neighborhood. The homes would be incorporated into the design. Some would become part of the park's narrative zones, like suburban Fallout and Operation Exodus quarters. Others would be rented out as vacation experiences. Guests could live like a suburban spy in hiding, complete with period props, hidden bunkers, and an animatronic HOA enforcement team for dramatic effect. The press lost their minds. Half the reporters burst into laughter, the other half stared in stunned silence. The residents of Silver Pines? Chaos. Some people cheered, a few cried, one man fainted. Linda stormed off mid-announcement, trailed by two remaining board members who looked like they were walking away from a burning building. But I wasn't finished. I explained that every homeowner would be offered a generous relocation package if they chose to leave. And if they stayed, well, they'd have to sign new leases with me, at significantly lower rent, of course, but with one condition. They'd live in a theme park, and they'd be part of the experience. The fallout was instant. Social media exploded with memes. Someone edited my face onto a roller coaster tycoon cover. Hashtags trended for days. Bunker World, HOA got owned. Claus bus. Tony printed a shirt that said, "Revenge is a dish best served with property rights." News vans camped outside the neighborhood entrances. Some families packed up and left immediately, muttering curses under their breath. Others stayed, confused but curious. A few even asked if they could invest. Linda, now publicly humiliated, tried one last desperate move. She filed for an emergency injunction, claiming the park would create unsafe living conditions, violate city zoning laws, and destroy the integrity of the community. The judge reviewed the plans, chuckled audibly, and dismissed the case. As it turned out, the bunker was classified as non-residential, mixed-use land, which made it a perfect candidate for commercial repurposing. And since the HOA had technically dissolved under breach of fiduciary duty, there was no authority left to stop me. Construction began 2 weeks later. Not the loud kind, at least not yet. The first step was surveying the old bunker, mapping out its vast halls, sealed rooms, and eerily preserved Cold War tech. The facility was a gold mine of weird history. There were old documents stamped top secret, maps with escape routes, and entire rooms filled with backup supplies still intact in airtight containers. Tony found a vintage government radio console and nearly cried. The developers were thrilled. They sketched out rides, live-action missions, bunker escape puzzles, and mock surveillance zones. They even designed a simulated HOA training center where guests could pretend to find each other for fun. Meanwhile, Silver Pines transformed day by day. Houses were repainted to fit the theme: faded greens, rusty browns, Cold War grays. Lawns became props. Some streets were renamed. Maple Avenue became Containment Zone Alpha. Sunset Lane turned into Checkpoint Echo. Residents who stayed were given roles. Some acted as secret agents. others as civilians caught in the middle of a fictional government cover-up. They were paid for their participation, of course, and given scripts, uniforms, and storylines. One elderly couple volunteered to play bunker survivors who hadn't seen the outside world in 50 years. They were a hit. Linda, now stripped of power and desperate to escape, tried selling her home. No takers. Nobody wanted to buy a house that shook every hour from underground ride testing or had a zombie parade pass by on weekends. In the end, she stayed, but not by choice. She took the only job available to her, tour guide. Every morning, she dressed in a full military-style uniform and led groups through the mock HOA command center, delivering lines written by a team of sci-fi screenwriters. Here at the Bureau of Neighborhood Order, she'd announce, we maintain suburban peace through extreme policy enforcement. The irony was so thick I could barely keep a straight face every time I saw her. Tony, of course, became a full-time consultant for the park. He led conspiracy-themed tours, hosted trivia nights about Cold War cover-ups, and launched a podcast called The HOA Strikes Back. The shack, now a fully refurbished headquarters, became my office. From there, I oversaw every detail. I wasn't just the owner. I was the architect of this entire madness. I had taken back my land, turned their dream into my playground, and flipped the power dynamic upside down. They had tried to control everything. Now they couldn't even control their own street names. And the best part? I hadn't broken a single rule. I had just played by theirs, only better. The same HOA that fined people for mailbox height had unknowingly built their empire on top of a ticking time bomb. All I had to do was wait, smile, and let them do the hard part. And now, as I stood on a hill watching a group of tourists take selfies in front of a house labeled Agent Zero's hideout, I couldn't help but think one thing. They never saw it coming. From the top of the ridge, I had the perfect view of what Silver Pines had become. Once a prim, tight-lipped neighborhood where people whispered about paint colors and frowned at mismatched patio furniture, it was now the beating heart of the most bizarre and wildly popular theme park in the country. Bunker World had opened with a blast, literally. On opening day, a choreographed detonation sent fake smoke rolling through the streets, while actors in hazmat suits guided screaming guests into mock evacuation zones. There were roller coasters that dipped below ground into parts of the old bunker, animatronic drones that patrolled the sky at night with glowing red eyes, and speakers hidden in flower beds that played Cold War radio chatter to create a low hum of paranoia. People loved it. Every ride, every attraction, every detail was meticulously designed to mock and mirror the madness that once ruled this place. There was a 3D ride called Fine or Flee, where guests had to escape the clutches of a ruthless HOA enforcer before being charged imaginary fines for leaving their trash cans out too long. The gift shop sold fake violation tickets, bumper stickers that said, "I survived the suburban surveillance state," and bobbleheads of a character named General Linda, who bore a suspiciously strong resemblance to a certain former HOA president. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, especially not on Linda herself. Linda had been given the choice to leave with the rest of the residents during the relocation phase. Most took the cash and ran, happy to distance themselves from the train wreck they had once called home. But Linda refused to leave. She tried to cling to what little power she thought she had left. She gave speeches, she started petitions, she even tried to gather a resistance group, which quickly fizzled out when they realized no one wanted to follow a woman who had lost her grip on the very concept of reality. So in the end, like a monarch stripped of her crown, she was absorbed into the very machine she once controlled. She worked now as part of the in-character staff, guiding guests through the HOA Hall of Infamy, which chronicled the wildest, most ridiculous rules ever enforced in the community's early days. The display featured real photos, framed citations, and dramatized reenactments of actual residents getting fined for crimes like unapproved lawn ornaments and non-regulation birdhouses. Linda had to recite lines written by our head of story design, lines that mocked every bit of the bureaucratic nonsense she had once worshipped. Her tour always ended with a looped video of her old HOA speech, followed by footage of the court verdict. Some said they saw her flinch every time it played. Others said she just stared straight ahead, dead behind the eyes. Tony, of course, had become something of a celebrity in his own right. He hosted a nightly show at the park's main stage, where he shared dramatic retellings of the Silver Pine saga, complete with dramatic lighting, slow-motion reenactments, and live polls from the audience. His signature sign-off, "Remember folks, always read the fine print, or end up living above a cold, warm missile lab," became a meme and ended up on t-shirts and mugs. He even got a book deal. I never expected him to become the face of the park's lore, but he took to it like a duck to conspiracy water. He claimed the whole thing was part of his master plan, though we both knew I had just wanted to mess with a few stuck-up board members and make a little money doing it. The tourists kept coming. They loved the chaos, the story, the fact that it was all real, or at least based on something real. News crews kept revisiting the story, calling it the greatest revenge arc in suburban history. High schools requested field trips. Film studios called about adaptation rights. A streaming giant even pitched a limited series. I didn't say no. Why would I? This was my legacy now, not just a guy who reclaimed his land, but someone who flipped the power structure on its head and turned a nightmare into a playground, literally. Every now and then, I'd still get the occasional hate letter. Some angry ex-resident demanding their home back or accusing me of psychological warfare. One person wrote, "You ruined our lives." Maybe I did. Or maybe I just exposed what those lives really were. Trapped inside a box of pointless rules enforced by people who thought they knew better than everyone else. People like Linda, who thought control equaled peace. All I did was hand them the rope and watch them tie the knot themselves. Not everything was petty. I made sure the original residents were given options. Those who stayed got new homes elsewhere, better ones, without fine print or neighborhood surveillance. A few even reached out to thank me after the dust settled. One guy, a quiet veteran who used to mow his lawn at night just to avoid HOA complaints, sent me a bottle of scotch with a note. "Finally, I can grow daisies without a hearing." It meant more than I expected, because for all the chaos and spectacle, what I did wasn't just about revenge. It was about flipping the script, about reminding people that power built on fear and nitpicking doesn't last. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky with streaks of orange and purple, I sat in my usual spot at the edge of the ridge, sipping lemonade and watching families laugh as they ran through simulated air raid drills and laser maze challenges below. Smoke machines puffed softly, music swelled from hidden speakers, and a group of costumed actors staged a dramatic HOA courtroom scene in the town square. It was absurd, beautifully absurd, and it was mine. Tony sat beside me, holding a bag of popcorn and grinning like a kid who just hacked into the Pentagon. "So," he said, tossing a kernel into his mouth. "What's next?" I thought for a moment, listening to the distant sound of fake alarms and delighted screams. Then I looked over at the original shack, now remodeled into the VIP lodge, and smiled. "Next," I said, "nothing. I think I'm good right here." Because sometimes the sweetest victory isn't loud or flashy. It's quiet. It's sitting on the land they once mocked you for owning, watching them walk through turnstiles to pay for the privilege of standing where they once ruled. It's knowing that you didn't need to fight. You just needed to wait, to smile, to play the long game. And when the moment was right, to remind them that every empire, no matter how tightly controlled, eventually falls. Especially the ones built on HOA bylaws.